What is going on, guys? Todd Fossey here. For those of you who don't know me, I am the founder and chief instructor at Integrative Defense Strategies, and this is the Tactical Jam session. I hope everyone's doing well and hope everyone had and is continuing to have a great weekend. Right out of the gate, going to come right out and let you know. I am running on fumes right now. I've been teaching 10 to 13-hour days for the last 4 days. And we've had an IDS Apex Citizen Defender Instructor Certification course happening here at IDS headquarters this week. And when I do that, I put everything into that training. The people that come here to train with us deserve every single ounce of energy that I have. And not that you guys don't deserve my best as well, but there's only so much of me to go around. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to give you my best with what I have left in the tank. First things first, huge thank you to everyone that came out and participated for our Apex Level 1 Instructor Certification course this week. Wow, we are at IDS, we are so blessed to have amazing affiliates and amazing instructors happening within our affiliate program. Super passionate, knowledgeable people, very skilled, and people who are in this industry for the right reason. So huge thank you to everyone that came out. You guys killed it. Super honored and proud to have you guys on board as Apex instructors. Little piece of business here. I will be teaching seminars in September. Let's see, what are the dates again? September 17th through the 19th in Oklahoma City Gun Club. I will be teaching at the concealcarry.com Guardian Conference. I will be teaching the weapons-based combatives portion of those seminars, along with other instructors that will be there: Larry Vickers, Spencer Keepers, Riley Ballman, Matt Little, Brian Eastridge, Steve Moses, Chuck Haggard, Samuel Middlebrook, Brian McCaughlin, Haney McMood, Andrew Bronca will be there. And like I said, I will be teaching the weapons-based combative stuff. If you guys are interested in that, this is going to be a world-class event. You're going to want to be there. It's going on for, 24 hours, 3 days, 24 hours of training. Check it out at guardianconference.com. I will be happy and honored to work with everyone who's going to be there at that conference. All right. So if you guys are here with me, leave a comment for me, will you, just to let me know who is here with me. I always like to know who's on board. Our topic for the day, deep and accelerated learning, is our topic for the day. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and it's a topic that I feel needs more attention within this industry: the science of deep and accelerated learning, human dynamics. For those of you who don't know, my professional background before this, as a professional, I worked in human performance as a human performance coach for elite athletes, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, and elite athletes and athletes and performers, not just athletes of all types, at a high level. So this is something that I have a deep passion for and a deep interest for. And something that's very important to us here at Integrative Defense Strategies, that we are employing the core principles of deep and accelerated learning at all times within all of our classes here that happen on a weekly basis, our training events, our training seminars, and then of course for our instructor courses. Anytime that we're employing learning and training, we want to employ these core principles. I sat down a while back and just kind of whipped this presentation up, just whipped up some talking points. Obviously, we could spend years and years and years discussing this. So I want to let you know this is kind of a thumbnail 30,000-foot view on the topic from our point of view and the way that we approach things at Integrated Defense Strategies on the topic of deep and accelerated learning. Along those lines, there's something that I'd like to say. when it comes to releasing content on social media, whether that be a live stream like this, or videos or information that people put out as trainers and educators on social media. I believe that it would be helpful if people who are consuming information online had a bit more of a realistic expectation of those that are distributing the information. Here's what I'm getting at. It's not uncommon for us and others like IDS to put out a video that's 2 minutes long, sometimes less than 1 minute long. And the consumers of that information oftentimes are expecting a 3-hour documentary with all sources cited, or to put out even a meme or information where they kind of are expecting a 300-page dissertation to go along with the information that we're putting out. And that's just not a realistic expectation. And I hope that you have a realistic expectation of this presentation as well. I lectured at medical schools for 15 years. I know how to pull information and documented information together, okay? People on social media have an average 9-second attention span when it comes to videos, okay? So we've tried to find this happy medium where we can put out concise, consumable information. And it's important to us that we're not putting out gratuitous information, that we're putting out information that truly is consumable, and truly is helpful and educational for those that are consuming it. Let's see who's here. Rich, tuning in, almost home. Thanks for coming out, Rich. Great training. It's a privilege to be involved. Rich Allen was one of our new Apex instructors that came out and trained with us this last week. So let's talk about the integrative defense strategies approach. Thumbnail 30,000-foot view approach to deep and accelerated learning. First things first. At IDS, we begin with data. We begin with data sets. We mine data. And then what we do is we come up with a meta-analysis of that data. That way it's not whimsical. That way it's not arbitrary. Okay? We want to take a look at what the data says, and then we want to build our curriculums, and we want to build and prioritize our training based on what the data sets say. This way, we can stay as objective as possible. At IDS, it's our priority to preserve life. We are not here to entertain you. There's lots of places that you can go that will entertain you. We're not here to entertain you. Our priority is to save your life. And unfortunately, I believe, and it is in my opinion, that the overwhelming percentage of this industry is focused on giving people an entertainment experience, okay? So they're giving you an experience that's entertaining, right? That's primarily entertaining, and they're masking it and they're disguising it as something that will actually be of high value to you, when in reality that's usually the things that you're practicing and training are low probability. We won't do that at IDS. Sorry, we just won't. So for those of you who are actually really truly interested in your DNA and your heart of hearts to come out and get training that is prioritized based on what you actually need over what you want, you might want to think about coming out to give us a shot, see how we go. Okay. Then the next piece is we want to take information and we want to turn it into application. The research shows that when training, there's a difference between training and education, by the way, that when training is front loaded with education first, when there's a cognitive load first, and they can take that data set or that information that they've been educated on, it helps to deepen and accelerate the learning. There's a deeper connection that takes place in the gray matter. They understand why. It's another phrase that we have at IDS. If people who are learning don't know why, they probably won't apply. They'll go, oh, yeah, okay, this is cool. But the moment they understand why they're doing it, they're more engaged in the learning. So that helps to deepen and accelerate their learning. The deep learning should be obvious to you in terms of what that means. It means it should be easily retainable. It should be retained, deeply retained. Okay. But accelerated learning, deep and accelerated learning, in our opinion, is where it's at. We can't rush it. It's not a process that can be rushed, but it's definitely a process that we don't want to slow down either. When we're talking about life and death at IDS, we believe that we want to have those that are learning from us reach a level of competence, and especially unconscious competence, as quickly as possible. But there's a neurological science to that. We can only get to a level of competence so fast, but that doesn't mean that we can't get there as quickly as possible. There's no reason to slow down that process. Okay. If you guys are still with me, tune in or leave me a comment to let me know what you're thinking about this conversation. Okay. So we start with data sets. Let's talk about the learning retention hierarchy now. How do people retain information when it's being consumed? All right, am I back? Sorry about that, guys. I got kicked offline. Looks like we still might have a few people on with me. Sorry about that. My apologies. Darcy said, hey, for me, find trying to apply whatever I'm learning to what I already know. That allows me to engage faster and use more readily. That's a really excellent point. Let's talk about how people retain information. And I'm gonna kind of address this specifically in the nature of firearms training. Even though we do a lot more than firearms training, we take an integrated approach toward training. But first and foremost, what human beings will retain will be a concept. as you're training or teaching somebody something, it's the concept that they will retain. So that's what we start with. We start with the concept. We start with the big pieces and we make our way to the smaller pieces. After that, they will retain a gross motor skill. Okay, so we'll start with the concept, teaching them the concept because that's what's most important. That's what they'll retain first. And then now we'll make our way to the gross motor skills because there's a higher probability of retention of the gross motor skills. After the gross motor skills, they will retain the fine motor skills. And then after the fine motor skills, they will retain what's called sensory tactile. In terms of perishability and how they will lose, right, how that information will or skill will perish from them, the first thing that they will lose will be the sensory motor. After that, it'll be the fine motor, then the gross motor. And then finally, the last thing that they will lose, and the last thing that is perishable, is the concept. So it is the concept that is the most important when we're talking, especially when we're talking about prioritizing based on life and death. In IDS, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're all about here, right? The stakes couldn't be higher. This is why it's important that we are taking a true scientific approach toward skill acquisition, deep and accelerated learning. This is very, very important, okay? So here's how we do it. Like I said, at IDS, we start with the data sets. We're data freaks here. What does the data tell us? That way it's not arbitrary, okay? Then we have 7 different levels of learning. We have levels. We have different topics that's tiered, 7 different tiers of learning that's based on probability. That's how we prioritize it. Need, difficulty, and complexity. So the way that we have it broken down is we have it prioritized based on primary, secondary, and tertiary skills. Primary, secondary, and tertiary skills. What are we going to spend the most time on since training time is so precious? We're going to spend the most time daily on the primary skills. For me personally, with my personal training regimen, I have things that I do every single day. I have things that I do once a week. I have things that I do once a month. I have things that I do quarterly. Then this is all scheduled. And I have things that I do once a year, right? And then I have things that I do once every 2 or 3 years. Okay. And it's all based on need, stakes, and probability. This is the entire idea. This way I can maximize it. And we teach this to our students and our instructors, and we hope that they understand how this works so they can start to prioritize what's best for them and prioritize their training based on what's best for their students. Within the 7 tiers of learning, we have learning templates. That's what we call it. Right? They're chunked learning templates. Human beings learn well within templates, within learning templates. So that's what we want to do. Templates tend to be thematic, okay? And they tend to be a little bit formulaic because those learning templates maximize retention. Within the learning templates, we have a learning progression. So learning templates and learning progressions is the next step. This is a great way that people learn and a great way that people retain. Remember, we want to get people to a level of competence as quickly as we possibly can. Then within the chunked learning templates and progressions, we have algorithms. We teach things in a way that's very algorithmic. Again, the research shows that human beings learn very well within an algorithmic or formulaic format. So that's what we do. And those algorithms are very malleable. They're very fluid. They're very flexible. They're very modular. You can take algorithms and you can mix and you can match them together in an infinite number of combinations. This, we believe, is the strongest approach that we know of. We're not done yet, but this type of approach is the strongest approach that we can think of to help to deepen and accelerate learning for our students and our instructors. Within the algorithms, we have the principles of neuroscience, deep and accelerated learning, specifically the principles of neuroplasticity. And the core principle of neuroplasticity, there are some metrics here that I'll share with you right now. All right. It's important that we understand that 70% of our neural connections are changing every single hour. Not every year, not 70% of our neural connections changing every year, not every month, not every week, not even every day. Every hour, 70% of our neural connections are rewiring themselves. And those neural connections will rewire themselves based on what we are spending the most amount of time on. The more that you do something, the better that you get at it for that reason. The brain and the nervous system is more like a river than it is a rock. Most people have this belief that it's just sort of set in stone, but it's not set in stone. It's always moving, it's always flexing, it's always changing, but there's a finite number of neurological resources. So the more that we do something, the autonomic nervous system and the body starts to understand, its own natural intelligence begins to understand this is something that's important. So it begins to dedicate its neurological resources to those things. And there are other things that we can do to speed up and accelerate and deepen that process that we'll be getting to later during this conversation. Okay. Myelin and myelination is a really big and important part of this process, right? Myelination is the hardwiring of neural pathways, right? It's how big the layer of protection myelin is around our axons. I'll break this down for you a little bit more in a minute. I'm just reading the definition for you formally, right? How big is the layer of protective myelin around your axons, right? Or your neural pathways, your nerve pathways, the motor pathways, neurokinetic pathways. It determines how fast and how accurately electrons can go from one neuron to the next, and therefore how good you are at performing a certain skill. So an axon is a motor nerve fiber, right? It's like a wire is what it is. And myelin is this is a sheath, right? It's an opaque sheath. It's like a coating on a wire. Okay, and the more that we practice something, the more myelin that is dedicated to that specific pathway, and the thicker that myelin becomes on the axon, the more efficiently rather those neural circuits become. They become integrated. They become hardwired, integrated circuits. The research actually shows that a myelinated circuit is 3,000 times more efficient than a non-myelinated circuit. And there are specific things that have to happen in order for those circuits to become myelinated and stay myelinated. This is a huge and important part of the learning process. Again, we're talking about life and death here. So we feel it's very important that we reach a level of myelination and unconscious competence with the skills. If the skills are there for us to save our life, we have to have that level of competence. Okay. This is also why skills are so perishable. There's a lot of science to this that I'm not going to geek out too much with you guys in this. Maybe another time. We'll spend more time doing a deep dive into that, but I want you guys to understand how that process works. There's more. There's other things. It's called synaptic pruning, and how those neurokinetic pathways become more and more efficient. The brain starts to prune away pathways that aren't being needed because they aren't being used, and then apply that neurological information to the pathways that are needed so they can produce even more myelin. Okay. So then it's very important for us to start to delve into what are the stages of competence. This is something that I believe is dramatically either ignored or misunderstood or dramatically underutilized when it comes to skill acquisition, when it comes to personal protection and self-defense. First and foremost, stage number one is unconsciously incompetent. Students don't know what they don't know. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect takes place. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a fascinating phenomenon to me. It's just absolutely fascinating. Okay, the Dunning-Kruger effect is when someone of low knowledge and low skill suffers from what's called it's a cognitive bias that is an illusory superiority, where they believe that they can do more and that they have more knowledge than they actually have. And within the same Dunning-Kruger effect, right, they suffer from a cognitive bias and an inability to recognize their own ineptitude. So they can't recognize how inept they are. They don't even know. They have no clue. They have no idea how badly they suck. They think they're really good at it. And this is very dangerous. This stage of unconscious competence and Dunning-Kruger effect is very dangerous when you're talking about personal protection and self-defense. It is in my view, in observing what happens in most of the self-defense systems and firearms training systems out there, that those systems are actually fanning the flames of this Dunning-Kruger effect and fanning the flames of a false sense of confidence. They believe that they can do far more than what they can actually do. To me, this is very, very irresponsible. And the vast majority of people that are running around out there believing that they can defend themselves don't recognize their own ineptitude. They're suffering from an illusory superiority, right? And oftentimes they don't even see the value in the skill that you're trying to teach them because they're so inept, they don't know. At IDS, we literally have a poster on our wall in our training center, and we take all of our students over there, especially new students, on a regular basis so they can read it, and we can have a conversation around the stages of competence and what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. It's important that they have that level of self-awareness so that when they're learning something new, for me, for example, when I'm learning something new, if I'm learning, especially something new from somebody else or something different from somebody else, I'll say to myself, okay, Todd, you're probably suffering from some Dunning-Kruger stuff here. Probably suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. So just keep your mouth shut, empty your cup of ego, and fill it with purpose, and sit and listen and take it in and absorb it, right? Hold on to what is useful and reject what is useless to you. This is an important part of the process, but I don't even know what I don't know in those situations, and same with others. The next stage of the 4 stages of competence is consciously incompetent. Now they've been training and practicing long enough that they finally know what they don't know. They've had some aha moments. This is critical that they understand this, right? They finally go to a level of conscious competence. Then after they reach the stage of conscious competence, they finally reach the stage of unconscious competence. That means that they can do it automatically. They don't have to think about it anymore. They finally reach that stage of unconscious competence. And oftentimes they can perform that task along with another task at the same time. Oftentimes they can have a conversation while they're performing that task. That's one clue that a person has reached a level of unconscious competence. In our opinion, if you're going to carry a firearm and if you're going to call yourself a citizen defender, you should have a level of unconscious competence with just about every single skill that you're going to be using. To us, this is a no-brainer, but there's something I got to tell you that I see. I've seen a lot. I see a lot of instructors out there throwing around bro science during their courses and seminars, throwing around pseudoscience during their courses and seminars. I've heard it said on multiple occasions that our goal is to get you to the level of unconscious competence by the end of this seminar. That might be a 4-hour seminar. That might be a 1-day seminar. That might be a 2 or 3-day seminar. And I'm sitting there thinking, that is physiologically impossible. I'm going to give you the metric, the basic metric for to reach a level of unconscious competence and myelination. Okay, this is something I want you to understand. The myelination that we were just talking about, right? Myelination and unconscious competence go together. The moment we reach unconscious competence, the beginnings of unconscious competence is the beginnings of when myelination is beginning to occur, when those circuits begin to become integrated, when long-term relationships are formed in our neurokinetic circuits. This is absolutely important to us. So here's the metric. Are you ready? The metric is 12 weeks. Hey, Peter. Thanks for coming out this week, man. We're really glad to have you on board. I'm glad that you're listening on the plane. Thank you so much. Here's the metric. Are you ready? It takes an average of 12 weeks of deep and intentional practice for myelination to occur. 20 minutes a day of practice for 12 weeks for one single skill. Think about that. For them to begin to reach the level of unconscious competence. Now at IDS, we've added a 5th level of competence, which is the mastery level. When we believe at IDS, when a person has reached mastery, that's really hard-wired myelination, and now they can begin to play jazz with it. They can begin to be more adaptive with their skill sets. They can play the blues, right? They can improvise and they can innovate once they reach that mastery stage. I see a lot of people trying to innovate before they've reached the mastery stage of understanding when it comes to specific skills. And that can be very dangerous. It can be very dangerous to lead people to believe that they are competent and that you can get them to a level of unconscious competence when I know that it's physiologically impossible for that to happen. Okay. So as practitioners, we need to be aware of that. And I would say as instructors, we need to especially be aware of how this works. So how can we deepen and accelerate our learning? What's a list of some of the things that we can practice on a regular basis to help to move that process along? Let's talk about it. First is the motivation, is why. There's a ton of research around this, tons of neuroscience around this. When a person is deeply in touch with their why, there can be several reasons why, but what I've found is the real why, the one that really moves people emotionally, the real why. When they're getting in touch with their why while they're training, really helps to ramp up the level of performance. This is absolutely critical in my view. For me, my motivation, at the deepest core, right? One, God has put me on earth to do the work that I'm doing. When I really get in touch with the deep emotional side of it, it's my wife. It's protecting my wife from harm, but also protecting my wife from harm in meaning that I don't want to leave my wife a widow. That would mean harm to her. So whenever I don't feel like training, or whenever I feel like, oh, I'm just going to kind of phone it in today and go through the motions, I get in touch with that why. We have to get in touch with the why if we really want to go deep and we really want to maximize our learning with whatever it is that we're doing. This facilitates rapid myelination growth. The next one is repetition and consistency. Repetition and consistency. If those signals are not traveling through that axon over and over and over again, there is no motivation for the body to produce myelin sheath. And if you're not producing myelin sheath, you're not going to reach that level of unconscious competence or mastery that you need to have. It's that simple. I try to tell people, this is not my opinion. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to undermine your training. I'm not trying to undermine you as an instructor. This is something that you need to know and understand. I'm trying to educate you. So you can stop with the fucking bro science, please. Enough already. Know what you know and know what you don't know. Next is deep and intentional practice. Slow, deliberate, intentional practice. Really getting involved and really diving into conscious and unconscious intention as you practice. This is something that I do on a daily basis, something that we teach people to do on a daily basis. This will create rapid myelination growth. This will take you to deeper and deeper levels of ability and talent. This will increase your performance at any time. Next is feedback loop by making mistakes. Here's a quote for you. Here's a quote for you. Are you ready? Failure is a biological requirement for myelination and unconscious competence to occur. The research shows it unequivocally. Failure is a biological requirement for myelination and unconscious competence to occur. The more that you fail, the more that you succeed. Those feedback loops, those course corrections are absolutely required so that the brain can figure out what is the most efficient pathway. And then it can practice what's called synaptic pruning, kind of like pruning a tree back, so that those nutrients and that information is flowing through the parts of the tree. And that's exactly what these neural pathways look like. They look like a tree with dendrites that reach out. That's exactly what it's like. It's like pruning a tree. Nature is nature. God created these patterns for a reason. So it's important that we are in touch with this and that we aren't afraid to fail, especially being afraid to fail in front of other people. I post live videos all the time. It says, show your failures. That's why I go live when I train. That's why I go live when I'm at the range. That's why I go live when I'm training with people that are freaking in the UFC. Because I want to encourage people to go out and fail. We do the best that we can, but failure facilitates success. It's that simple. So that's the next piece. Next is immediate remediation. So the moment that a mistake is made, it's critical that we go back immediately and correct it. Immediate remediation. The moment that a mistake is made, we go back immediately and then when we correct it. Every single repetition that I see in my classes with any student that I'm working with, the moment that I observe a mistake, a major mistake. Now, don't get me wrong. We'll get into later about overcoaching and overcorrection. Don't get me wrong. But when I see major mistakes happening over and over again, we don't go for perfection out of the gate. We'll get to that in a second. We will go back and we will correct it. So let me put it like this. If we are isolating a specific skill, when someone is struggling with that skill in the beginning, and I'm not talking about every single detail, there's a way to prioritize how that works. We will go back and we will correct it. That way we're not creating a training scar. We don't want our neurokinetic pathways going in the wrong direction. We don't want to create the wrong neural map. This is absolutely important. So we'll go back and we'll remediate it, especially so that we're ending on a success. This is another thing that will deepen and accelerate your learning. Amplitude or intensity. The best amplitude in terms of when we're talking about physical training right now, force on force, touching hands with a partner, right? Working things. The best amplitude in terms of speed and power, right? For level of force is 30 to 40%. When you are practicing and you're getting repetitions in at 30 to 40% amplitude, it speeds up and it accelerates your learning. This is critical. I would say for me at IDS, and for myself personally, 85% of my training and practice has a 30 to 40% amplitude, low amplitude. The research shows that we're retaining more at 30 to 40% amplitude. Our sensitivity is greater at 30 to 40% amplitude. Then we want to have splashes of high amplitude experience that teases out the flaws under pressure. So, we go from 30 to 40% up to 75, 85%, splashes of that 15% of the time. And then occasionally we'll go 100% goes at full speed, full amplitude. This isn't me making this up. You can look it up for yourself. This is where we maximize learning. This is where we deepen and we accelerate our learning, 30 to 40% amplitude with splashes of high intensity and high amplitude. Then we want to chunk up our learning into small units, or what we call learning templates. Another thing that will speed up and accelerate your learning. A cool strategy for learning in this way is to learn things out of order. So here's a strategy that I use. I like to use learning progressions. I already talked to you about that, right? It's a stair-step approach, right? Or a learning block approach where it's comprehensive, where one block builds on the previous blocks. We all know what those learning progressions look like. I'm not inventing that. Okay. I'm good at employing those things, I believe, but I didn't invent that. So here's what I'll do. I'll teach people I'll teach people in a comprehensive way, scaffolded way, learning in a building block methodology. Then we'll go back after they've learned it in order and they'll learn it out of order. I'll take that and I'll rearrange that order. So we isolate those pieces. And the research shows that as you isolate those pieces, it deepens and accelerates their learning. They have a deeper understanding of what those isolated pieces are. After they've learned that piece out of order, we'll go back and we'll put it back in order again. That deepens and it accelerates the learning. Now, this is confusing for a lot of people who have a lower level of understanding when it comes to skill acquisition. They go, what is he doing? He's fucking up. This guy has no idea how to teach. When the reality is whoever's employing that methodology has a much higher understanding of skill acquisition than the other people do. This is what happens with people of low knowledge. Remember, they're suffering from Dunning-Kruger effect. So therefore, they believe if they don't understand what it is, that it's wrong. When reality is it's a much higher level of skill, much higher knowledge of skill acquisition. How ironic is that, right? Darcy, Spencer Frink. Are we hitting 85%, 100% splashes every day or once a week? I think that's a really great question, and it really depends. It really depends. Depends on the skill level of the student, I think. I don't like to hit that 85% every single day. It really kind of depends. You kind of got to feel that out and be intuitive with that. I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't hit that every single day, but my intuition tells me, my experience tells me that isn't sustainable. We have to, we have to kind of work within that really intentional phase. I probably I like to hit that 85 to 100% probably about once a week, maybe twice a week at most. And then we can break it up over, training seasons, and how do we break down those seasons. There's a lot more that goes into it, but in general, when we're talking about training ongoing on a regular basis, for me anyway, I find it to be most sustainable for myself and my students if I'm hitting that once or twice a week. It kind of depends. Okay. So there's a few additional strategies for you. Let's see here. Got a little banner for you guys. I think I wrote this down. Repetition is the mother of skill, but discipline is your daddy. That's from my coach and my mentor, Greg Nelson. It's a Greg Nelson quote. And that's exactly how I feel. It's all about the repetition, but we have to have the discipline to continue that repetition, especially when we don't feel like it. That's what I say to myself all the time. If I'm going to be completely transparent with you guys, I'll just tell you point blank, I train and practice just about every single day. Now, granted, I'm a professional. I don't expect others to be, to do all of that. Okay. 85% of the time, I don't feel like it. 15% of the time, I'm really into it and I really feel like going. Once I get started on the days that I don't feel like it, well, that's a little bit different. Then once I get started then I get into it and I forgot that I didn't feel like doing it. It's all about developing those habits, the habits of consistency. You just continue even if you don't feel like it, and that's where we really start to get into the greatest levels of growth. It's all about consistency. Listen, let me put it to you like this. If I were going to really break it down scientifically, I'll just come right out and say it, guys. You guys know I don't pull any punches. And please bear with me. I care too much to do you the disservice of not saying this, okay? For those of you who go out and train with an instructor at a seminar for a day to 3 days at a time, once or twice a year, you're absolutely wasting your time and money if you are really, truly interested in having a level of competence. It's cool if it's a hobby for you and you want to go out, and with friends or go out by yourself and have a little training vacation away, that's cool. But in terms of actual skill acquisition, it's an absolute waste of time. It's cool that you might absorb some concepts and some knowledge, but in terms of the improvement of your skill, it's a complete waste of time. It's like saying this. If I went to go train with, say, a strength and conditioning coach, and I went and I trained with this strength conditioning coach for anywhere from 4 hours to 3 consecutive days, am I going to be in shape for the rest of the year? Absolutely not. I'm not going to be in shape for the rest of the other 362 days a year. I'm not going to be in shape for that, and I'm not going to fool myself to think that I am. I have to take that knowledge and information and put it into apply these principles to it. Daily practice, or at least consistent, frequent practice in order for that level of competence to occur. It's a complete waste of time. Information isn't enough. To have information is an intellectual understanding of something also is not enough. This is something else that really pisses me off and bothers me. This can help, but it's not enough. You're either trained or you're untrained. It's that simple. Okay, here's another example. If I read several books and I have a PhD in exercise science and bodybuilding, let's just say bodybuilding, I know I have tons and tons of knowledge on bodybuilding. Does that make my muscles any bigger? The mind is like a muscle. These neurokinetic pathways are very, very much like building a muscle. And either they're there or they're not. That's simple. They're either there or they're not. You're either trained or you're untrained. At IDS, this is where theory comes to die. This is why people who are theorists bother me. They're out there spouting theory, right? They're out there spouting theory. IDS is a laboratory. I'm not saying we have all the answers, but our school is a lab. We are constantly seeking those answers, not just from ourselves. We're constantly challenging our thesis from the best in the world. We want to challenge the thesis. We want to find out for sure. We want to test the crap out of it through the scientific method as closely as possible, even though this is both an art and a science happening simultaneously. It's an art and a science at the same time. We're heavier on the science side, but there's definitely an artistic side to it. We have to understand that because it isn't quantifiable. So here's our process. There's a metaphor for our process of refinement. This is how we like to do it. We like to use the analogy of a sculptor. Okay? This is what we've found to be most effective teaching methodology and learning methodology. So just bear with me. The metaphor of a sculptor. We start by chiseling. We start by knocking off all the big chunks. We don't expect or even encourage perfection immediately. We need to have those feedback loops and those failures, right, along the way. Let me change the banner. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. So we're starting by chopping off all of those big chunks immediately. That's the first thing that we do. Then we'll start to chisel and knock off the chunks that are going to be a little bit smaller than that. Then after we chisel, we're going to start sculpting. We're going to start creating some shape after we've knocked out those big chunks, a little bit smaller chunks. Now we start to sculpt, and then we start shaping things, right? Then we'll kind of start to grind out some of the rough spots, and we'll start to polish out the rough spots during the learning. And then we'll rinse it. And then we'll repeat. That's the process that we practice here at IDS. When I have a new student, we don't go for perfection immediately in most cases. I'm speaking in gross generalizations right now. We want them to grasp the general concept. Why? Because if they leave here today, they might have to use it. I'm not waiting 4 or 5 years so I can extract as much time and energy and money out of people as possible before I teach them what they actually need to know. I'm not going to entrap them. I took the Socratic oath years ago to do no harm. My objective and my priority is the preservation of life. So I get people ready as quickly as I possibly can. Remember the process of retention is first a concept, then a gross motor skill, then a fine motor skill, then sensory tactile. So I teach them in that order, and that goes right along with this process of sculpting, or chopping, chiseling, sculpting, shaping, grinding, polishing, rinsing, and repeating. That's how we do it at IDS. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying you're glad we started these live streams. I appreciate it. Okay. I'm putting all of this out there for your consideration. That's how we do everything at IDS. You have the right to think for yourself and take in what we ever put out as useful for you and reject what isn't. Personal protection is exactly that. It's personal. You get to choose. You get to decide what's most effective for you. You get to choose what your process is. You're your own unique sovereign person. How you learn and what works for you may not work for somebody else. It's that simple. But we want to employ the best possible strategy based on our knowledge and deep background on this to help get people to a level of competence as quickly as possible. So additional considerations that I kind of have written up for you guys. Thanks, Darcy. Appreciate that. Additional considerations. Early on, we recommend letting the inconsequential flaws go. Refine them over time. Refine yourself over time. I have a rule whenever I start something new, a new job, a new skill, and something new that I'm doing. For the first 20 times that I do it, I have zero expectation of myself. None. I'm just going there and letting my body learn it. This is a different kind of learning, by the way. Let me just talk about this quick. A lot of people try to intellectualize their training. Again, information isn't enough. It has to be turned into application. It has to be turned into experience. Okay. I forgot where I was going with that. Sorry. Hopefully, I told you I'm on fumes. Hopefully it'll come back to me. Maybe it will. But we want to let the inconsequential mistakes go early on. Yet have awareness of where the training scars may or may not be developing. Know where to be rigid and know where to be flexible. Oh, I know. Declarative memory versus kinesthetic memory. That's what I was going to say. This isn't like learning and memorizing dates for a test. It's a completely different kind of memory. That's called a declarative memory. Let your body learn it. Yes, you can have an intellectual understanding of it, but you got to let your body learn it. That's a kinesthetic memory. It's a completely different pathway. It's a completely different kind of memory. Okay, declarative memory versus a kinesthetic memory. Let your body learn it. A lot of intellectuals come in, they try to intellectualize their way through things instead of letting their body learn it. This is important. It has to be experiential in that way. There are no neutral repetitions. You're either constructing or deconstructing these neurokinetic pathways, or what's burned into your cerebellum. The cerebellum is responsible for, is the part of the brain that's responsible for motor skills. So either these pathways are burned into the cerebellum through myelination and unconscious complex that we were talking about, or they're not. Now let's talk about programming versus training. And I could go on about this part for hours, but I'm going to try to keep it brief. And I have strong opinions about it for your consideration. When I observe most training methodologies, most instructors, I believe, they believe that they're programming people to do certain things versus training them. In programming, it's a one-for-one match. What you put in is exactly what comes out. You program somebody to respond to a specific stimuli, to a specific having a specific association to a specific stimuli, and whatever you teach them to do is exactly what's going to come out. And I'm here to tell you, it may or it may not. Now, this hasn't just been from my own observation, but had me interviewing lots of very high-level people and high-level coaches. And I'll tell you what, it may not be what you want to come out. Your unconscious is processing far more than what your conscious mind is processing. You may have been trained what you thought was programmed to zig, but your unconscious mind picks up on variables that you're not consciously aware of, and you zag instead. Sometimes those mistakes are detrimental, but oftentimes they're not. We've all had that experience. You don't know why you did something, but your unconscious picked up on a pattern. It picked up on a piece of stimuli that you weren't consciously aware of. A lot of instructors make the mistake of believing that they're programming something because they have a sophomoric understanding of training and they have a sophomoric understanding of neuroscience. You can program people. There are ways to do it with some torture and drugs and certain types of technology. You can program people to do it. But I believe I witness a lot of training methodologies and a lot of systems out there that have really are working within outdated information. And they think that they're programming people when they're not. We don't even want to. Programming implies maladaptability, rigidity. You're programmed to do exactly this and that. The variables in valence aren't repeatable. Why would you want that? Why wouldn't you rather train someone to have adaptive principles? Darcy says, man, this has been gold, Todd. I've got to bake bread and get my night reps. Thanks again. Thank you so much for tuning in. By the way, Darcy, I want to let you know I love your stuff, man. Like from a distance, like I'm one of these guys that sits back at a distance, and I like to watch videos on bushcraft, and so I love the stuff that you do. Thank you so much for chiming in, and thank you so much for your comments and your support. It means the world to me. Go enjoy, brother. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All right, let's continue through this. Next, understand the different learning styles and meet the students where they're at. This is the other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect is people of high ability automatically and unconsciously make the assumption that what comes easily for them and what is easily understood for them is easily understood for everybody else, when it's not. So it's important that we're meeting our students where they're at, okay? And we're bringing along based on where they're at and what their attributes are and what their skill level is, not what ours is. For me personally, I don't want people to be Todd clones. Their attributes and backgrounds and styles and histories and intentions and motivations are different from mine. I want them to be them. I don't want them to be me. I want them to develop their own style based on what I'm teaching them. The next piece is Understand that everyone is a work in progress, and no one will arrive. And you won't arrive at your destination. That day never comes. You won't ever arrive. Everyone's a work in progress. No matter how far you go, you'll continue to be a work in progress. And understand that very few have the inner desire or motivation to travel the path toward mastery. The overwhelming majority of the population doesn't care. That's okay. But as instructors, and for those of us who do care as instructors, that doesn't mean that we can't employ principles of learning and training that isn't going to help deepen and accelerate their learning to the best of our ability. We can't rush it. All learning has to go through its gestation period, but we don't need to slow it down. Just being honest with you, it's one of my criticisms of the martial arts world. Padded curriculums, outdated training methodologies that are designed to entrap and extract as much time, energy, and money from people as possible. The firearms world is the other extreme, where the training is far too infrequent. That's why we use the training methodology that we use, because we can train and practice just about everything that we do on a daily basis. The worst case scenario is that we can train and practice with others on a weekly basis. Worst case scenario. That's how we reach a level of deep accelerated learning, through training, repetition, and practice, ongoing, and all the other principles that we've been talking about. Offer them the tools and support that they need, and perhaps it will inspire them to go to levels they never knew possible. To me, that's what our job as leaders, as instructors. Then get the mind out of the way, as I mentioned earlier, and let the body do the learning. There's a difference between declarative memory and kinesthetic memory. Those two things aren't the same. They can work together, they can enhance one another, but it's a completely different place. Then the next piece is work in the sweet spot, just beyond the reach and the ability of yourself and the student. If the task is too easy, they will underperform, and the learning is slowed or stopped. If the task is too difficult, they will experience unending frustration, and the learning will be slowed or stopped. So you can visualize this. If this is the goal right here that students are trying to reach, once they reach this and this becomes too easy for them, I'll move it so that it's constantly out of reach. If it's too close, it's too easy for them. They're not being challenged, and that's not deepening or accelerating their learning. If it's too far away and they can't reach it, well, that just becomes too difficult for them, and that slows and stops their learning. But right here, when they're when it's just out of reach, they're challenged to just the right degree. This is where we deepen and accelerate the learning. So when I tell my students all the time, I will always find a way to improve you, that's one of the ways that I do it. And there's infinite number of examples for how that can be done. Infinite number of ways for how that can be done. This is what we call the sweet spot. For myself personally, with my regular practice, that's what I want to do too. I'm always finding a way to challenge myself so it's just out of reach. This is where improvements come. Also, people believe that improvement should be this straight line to improvement, but it doesn't work that way. It's this up and down process, but the average of success, the batting average, continues to improve over time. But it isn't this straight line, straight up or straight down. There's plateaus that happen. There's a whole process that goes into this. But while we employ this and while we continue, we can work through those plateaus and the ups and downs in training. Okay. All right. So there's a few thoughts for you guys on deep and accelerated learning, some of the principles of deep and accelerated learning. What are your thoughts on this? Is this something that's resonating with you? I have a question for you. Is education enough? When I ask you that question, is education enough? Is an intellectual understanding of a topic enough? I have a problem. I'll come right out and send it. Come right out and say it. I see people in this industry who are social media content creators who have an intellectual understanding of something, but it becomes very obvious to me that they don't train. They're talking heads who don't train. They say things that they don't really truly understand, that they don't truly have experience with. That's an intellectual understanding of it. You can just tell. Game recognizes game, and they'll talk with confidence, And they'll say things in a way that, they'll use influencing techniques to lead you to believe that they know what they're talking about. But it doesn't take long for you to see right through their bullshit. My question for you is education enough? Is an intellectual understanding of something enough? Do you believe that that's true? Another question that I have for you is intermittent training enough? Is training on a rare occasion going to be enough? Is it? You're talking about having to make life and death decisions in milliseconds in compressed time under extreme stress. Is intermittent practice enough? Great quote, Spencer Frank. Training without education is hopeless. Education without training is useless. I love that quote. Let me say it again. Training without education is hopeless. Education without training is useless. Man, can I borrow that and quote you? I absolutely love it. So the first sentence is training without education is hopeless. That's what I said earlier when I said we have a little thing that we like to say at IDS. It says if they don't know why, they won't apply. That's why we start with education and we take the information and we turn it into application. Education without training is useless. That's both sides of this equation that I've been articulating here. And thank you, Spencer. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to take a picture of it on my phone right now so that I can keep that and I can quote you on it because I love that. That's one of the best things I've ever seen on this. So I'm taking a picture of your comment right now. Thank you for that so much. Anytime I can get a little nugget that I can use to help people learn and help people to increase their probability of survival, I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it. Thank you so much. So here's the 3 questions I have for you. Is education enough? Is intellectual understanding enough? Then the next question that I have is intermittent training enough based on what I've showed you? And then what is your learning and teaching methodology? Obviously this is a huge topic, but I'm curious, what is your methodology? What's your process? What do you do? What are little nuggets that I can get from you? Now that I've talked, I'd like to turn this into a little bit of a conversation if we can. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Please leave comments about what you're thinking and feeling about this because it's super helpful for me and to forward and move the conversation along. Okay. Any thoughts? Okay. All right, guys. So our running time now is just a little bit over an hour. For those who jumped in on this late, I recommend that you go back to the beginning. I was kicked offline for some reason and I jumped back online. But go back to the beginning of this conversation and watch it all the way through because it's kind of a progression. It's kind of a buildup. But I really hope that you found this to be helpful. I really hope that you found this information to be valuable. I believe that it's time for us to bring the training world up to date with its understanding of the science of skill acquisition and training methodologies. There's a lot of outdated stuff out there. On the other hand, there's a lot of ancient stuff out there that has understood these processes for a very long time. So I think it's important for us to bring it up to speed. I believe that martial arts tends to have a stronger understanding of this than the firearms training world does. In my opinion, the firearms training world is just either they pretend to understand it or they just don't understand it or they ignore it altogether. That's my opinion. It's time to bring this science of skill acquisition into play. A couple of last things I'll say about that. I talked about what is most retentive when it comes to skill acquisition. Starts with the concept, then the gross motor, then the fine motor, then the sensory tactile. The firearms training world teaches that in the opposite order. They start with small fine motor, sensory tactile, and small fine motor, complex fine motor skills, which are very, very difficult to retain if they aren't practiced a lot. They will just disappear so fast. It'll make your head spin. I think I might have a new comment here. Victor says, thank you a lot, Todd. a lot for the golden nuggets of wisdom shared. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the comment and for tuning in. Isaac Birch says, in the future, could you address the idea of how to effectively teach both beginners and more experienced students at the same time? I can touch on it right now, Isaac. All of our classes are all levels together. And oftentimes what we'll do is we will match up our more, not always, but when we're in the drilling phase, especially when we're in the drilling phase, we will match up our more experienced students with our new students, because the new students learn so much by touching hands and training and drilling with the experienced students. And in turn, the research shows that the experienced students are deepening and accelerating their learning by helping the newer students understand. It gives them a deeper understanding of what they're doing by teaching it. So we match people up that way on purpose. And also it creates a synergy within our culture, we believe. Then when it comes to time to start, doing some situational drills and things like that, and increasing the amplitude, we'll match people up based on their size and skill level. But then it's also important for higher level people to have those experiences with low level people and vice versa. So there's kind of an art to mixing it up, but that's a general understanding of how we do it. Maybe in the future, I'll do an entire show just on that. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we wrap this up? Okay. Guys, thank you so much. If you're watching this, you're probably a citizen defender. And if you're a citizen defender, that means that these things are in your DNA. That's what you are. This is what you were born to do. You were born to watch over the flock. You were born to be a protector. And we're living in a world today that demonizes citizen defenders, that demonizes demonizes the protectors in the world because they're afraid of us. The sheep are afraid of the sheepdog because they saw his teeth when he fought the wolf. IDS was created to provide support and training and education for people who have it in their DNA, people who were born to watch over the flock. This is what we are. This is what we do. We're not ashamed of what we are. We're not ashamed of what we do. And you shouldn't be ashamed of who you are. And you shouldn't be ashamed of what you do. You are not toxic. You are fantastic. This is a place where like-minded people can come together so that we can move the training paradigm forward with the hope of creating a broadband deterrent to violence. The more people that are trained, the more polite society that we live in. The more people that are trained, the more that people are focusing also on self-improvement. The more that we improve ourselves, the better people that we can be, the better the world becomes. That's what we're about. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I'll be on every single Sunday night at 8 p.m. for the Tactical Jam session. Oh, I think I have one more comment here before I tune out. You're welcome, Isaac. Thank you. All right, guys. So I will leave you with this.